Good morning. My name is Stephen James. I'm the youth pastor here at He's Alive Church. And this morning, we're leaning into one of the 7 I am statements that Jesus spoke about himself in the Gospel of John, where Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. And we'll be in John chapter 10, if you guys want to go ahead and turn there in your Bibles. And here's what this passage is going to teach us, that Jesus is the good shepherd who leads us into the life that is really life. It also teaches us what it looks like for someone to really follow Jesus. But before we get into that and to help us understand the idea of living the life that is really life, I want to talk about using things against their intended use. Have any of you guys ever done anything really dumb? Unfortunately, I have a long history of doing dumb stuff, which I'm not going to delve too deeply into this morning, but I will share one episode from when I was a kid that will give you a good idea of what I'm talking about. And I remember one day I was in my bedroom. I was around 6 or 7 years old, and I was eating a Hershey's Kiss. And I balled up the metal foil wrapper, and I was about to throw it away when I noticed that the little ball of aluminum foil was exactly the same size as one of the holes in an electrical wall socket. Like, you know, the one small hole at the bottom that looks like the mouth of a wow emoji? Like, dude, just check it out sometime. A balled up Hershey's Kiss wrapper is exactly the same size. And so what did I do? I jammed it up in there. And it was a perfect fit. And the only problem was that I couldn't get it back out. Now, there was a couple ways I thought of that I could go about getting it back out. The first thought was to suck it out. Literally, I put my lips around it and tried to suck it out, and that didn't work. The second plan was to find something skinny and try to pry it out. And it took me a little while to find something that was skinny enough and strong enough to really get up in there and get it out, but I finally found the thing in my closet. And I had to reach up really high and get it, but I knew that it was going to work. What I found was a metal coat hanger. I took the hook on it, I bent it straight, and I started doing surgery on the outlet. And I might have experimented with jamming it into the different holes as well, and at one point, I jammed it in a little bit too deep, and back! A shower of sparks came just showering out of the outlet, and simultaneously 120 volts and 15 amps of electrical energy went surging up my arm like a pulsating swarm of angry bees. It blew me halfway across the room, and all the lights on that side of the house went dark. And to this very day, there is a black burn mark on that outlet, and I'm pretty sure that that Hershey's wrapper is still in there. And that's what happens when you use things against their intended use. Here's the thing. A coat hanger is good. An electrical wall outlet is good. A metal coat hanger inside an outlet is not good. My guess is the inventor of the metal coat hanger didn't intend for his invention to be jammed into an electrical socket, and the inventor of the socket didn't envision someone jamming a metal wire into it either. Maybe that's why he made it look like a wow emoji, as if to say, wow, you're dumb. Well, that's not what these things were designed or created for, and the point of all this is that if we fail to understand what we were designed for, and therefore if we misunderstand what something was designed for and therefore misuse it, then we're probably going to harm ourselves or we're going to harm someone else. And we also might miss out on the joy that those things were intended to bring. For example, a 23-pound gold nugget. Now, that's pretty valuable. If you found one, you could sell it and make a lot of money. And the first gold ever found in the United States was found in a creek about 20 miles from here by a young boy named Conrad Reed in 1799. He found a 23-pound rock, and he didn't know that it was gold. So he took it home, and it was used as a doorstop in their backyard shed for 3 years. If you sold the same gold nugget today, it would be worth thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, it worked as a doorstop, but I think we can all agree that it was worth so much more than that. An ice skate is an incredible invention that brings a lot of joy, but they make a terrible razor. If you use it as a razor, you're going to hurt yourself, and you're also going to miss out on the joy that the ice skate brings. Or a guitar. A guitar is a great musical instrument. Now, could you use it as a paddle in a canoe? Probably, but that's not what it was designed for, and you're missing out on the joy that the guitar brings. Now, this principle is true of gold nuggets and of ice skates and of guitars and of you and me. If we fail to see what we are created for and the design that the Lord weaved into our existence, then we will fail to see what our life is about. We will bring harm to ourselves and others, and we will miss out on the joy that God intended for our lives, the abundant life, the life that is really life. And here's the passage that talks about it in the Bible, John chapter 10, verses 1 through 18. In John chapter 10, verses 1 through 18, Jesus teaches us this. I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have ever come before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of the sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. And so here's the main idea. You were created for God. You were created for life in relationship with God. You were designed to get your sense of who you are from who Jesus is, and you're created to get your sense of what to do from what Jesus did for the world. To live into that life is to live the abundant life, the life that is really life the way that God intended for it to be lived. And any life that sells you short of that is a counterfeit life and has absolutely no ability to satisfy you. In fact, it will rob you of the joy that you are supposed to have and potentially harm you and others. All of this is beautifully explained in Jesus' metaphor in the passage I read that compares us to sheep, the fellowship of believers to a pasture or sheep pen, and Jesus to the good shepherd that leads his sheep in and out of that sheep pen. So let's talk briefly about the pasture or the sheep pen. Shepherds in the Middle East lead their sheep over long distances during the day so that they can graze wherever they can out in the open country. But at night, the shepherd secures them in a sheep pen, a small area surrounded by a rock wall with a single entrance. It's a place of protection during the night. And so the pasture represents the church, the fold of God. It represents the fellowship of believers, of people who are called by the name Jesus. The Lord is protective of it. He provides the deepest needs in it, and it is a place of security. However, the sheep pen is not the end goal for the sheep. More on that later. Inside the pasture are the sheep, which represent us, Christians, one who are led by Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And around this pasture is a wall. The wall is designed to keep strangers and dangers out of the pasture and keep the sheep inside the pasture. The pasture is protected. Interacting with that wall are all sorts of bad guys. And verse 1 begins by saying, "The man who does not enter the pasture by the gate, but climbs over the wall, is a thief and a robber." And here, Jesus is metaphorically referring to the Pharisees, the type of people who would condemn Jesus for healing a man born blind on the Sabbath. Jesus' sign of healing the man born blind is the immediate context, along with the subsequent showdown with the Pharisees. That's the immediate context of what Jesus is talking about in this passage. The Pharisees were spiritually blind religious leaders. They were spiritually blind shepherds who were all too comfortable leading people into heartless religion as opposed to the way of the Lord. And all the bad guys mentioned in this passage include thieves, robbers, strangers, hired hands, and wolves. Now, the bad guy who climbs over the wall represents the voices and influences that try to get the sheep across the wall apart from the good shepherd. In other words, they represent counterfeit ways that we try to live the good life or achieve salvation, cut off from who we were created to be and what we were designed to do. And one of those bad guys is the robber mentioned in verse 1. And robbers are obviously bad guys. They're usually armed with things like guns or knives or like swinging chains. And you can think of like a bank robber or someone who knocks off a convenience store. They make their intentions known. They're going to come right up to the teller or the cashier, stick a gun in their face, say, "Give me all your money now." They take what they want, and then they're gone. Robbers come in and rob the sheep, and they're obvious about it. And so robbers represent counterfeit ways that people try to live the good life that are obviously harmful, obvious sins. It's about living for pleasure now and living with the consequences later. So in our day and age, this could refer to things like drug abuse, which promise an easy way to feel good now while we face the consequences later when we're sick and addicted. This could take the form of becoming rich or powerful through corruption or injustice, by taking what you want at the expense of others just because you can or because it's easier than doing it the right way. And so the robbers represent all the obvious sins and obviously bad influences that have racked the world for ages. Robbers represent illegitimate ways of achieving good life or salvation that are obviously harmful. Then there are thieves, also in verse 1. Now, thieves are a little bit more covert. They're secretive. They wear all black. They work at night. They disable security systems. They want to avoid detection. You guys can think like a cat burglar sneaking through an open window to steal Granny's jewelry, or art thieves hacking through complicated security systems. Thieves sneak in and rob the sheep too, but the sheep may never know it until it's too late because the thieves are sneaky. Thieves represent counterfeit ways of achieving the good life that aren't so obvious. Thieves seem to promise a secure and satisfying life, but in the end, they will leave us empty and desperate. For example, some people try to achieve fame and notoriety, to make a name for themselves because they think that that will bring them ultimate happiness. Other people seek out a comfortable life by devoting their whole lives to working off their butts to climb the corporate ladder because they think that that job will give them ultimate meaning in life or ultimate happiness in that paycheck. Or some people get caught up in an obsession, something that seems harmless, like a hobby or a sport or a relationship or a political movement, and they devote all their time and energy to that thing. Thieves could also represent the small sins, sins that seem to be victimless, sins that say, "What's wrong with it? I'm not hurting anybody." Sins that are easy to rationalize, things like gossip or envy or greed. Thieves represent illegitimate ways of achieving the good life that are secretly harmful. Verse 10 says that the thieves and robbers come only to steal and kill and destroy. They don't really give you the life that's really life. They take it away. The thieves and robbers aren't coming to rob from the sheep. They're coming to rob the sheep. The sheep are the property that they want to steal, and the sheep represent you. They want to get you outside the sheep pen, outside the wall, out of the protection of the good shepherd so that you can be destroyed by the wolves. Then there's strangers in verse 5. The strangers are these people who come in and try to trick the sheep into following them out of the sheep pen. You guys are probably used to seeing Western movies where cowboys are driving livestock. Usually they're behind the flock. They're riding a horse, carrying a bullwhip. Maybe they have extra help and some dogs off to the side to keep the herd in order. But the eastern way of herding sheep, such as in this passage, is different. The shepherds walk ahead of the sheep, leading them by calling out to them over and over again, either a word or a name or a vocal effect, or maybe even using an instrument such as a flute. And the sheep will learn to recognize the shepherd's voice and follow them. The strangers in verse 5 are these shady and creepy people who learn to mimic the voice of the shepherd and trick the sheep into following them out of the pasture. And so the strangers represent some of the more insidious voices that are calling out to you today, trying to entice you into a way of life that seems good, but in reality cuts you off from who you were designed to be. When I think of the strangers' voices, I think of all the life philosophies that sound good on the surface, but are completely cut off from the work and message of Jesus Christ. Messages like the ones the Pharisees advocated and are still represented today, which says this: you have to work for God's love. God doesn't really approve of you. You have to earn his forgiveness. Or here's another message I hear a lot: if it feels good, do it. Can't be wrong if it makes you happy. Or here's another one: Jesus isn't the only way to God. All religions are basically the same, and anyone who says differently is narrow-minded. Let's just get along, man. It's all about love. One final message that's counterfeit, says this: our greatest purpose in life is self-discovery, but that's your responsibility. If you want to find yourself, then you have to make it happen, and don't let anyone stand in your way. These are all false voices that try to entice us into false ways of living by mimicking the voice of God. They sound good on the surface, but they represent counterfeit pursuits of the good life and salvation that lead to a wasted life in the end because they are cut off from the gospel. The final bad guys from this passage are the hired hands found in verse 12 through 13, which again says this: the hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. So the hired hand does not own the sheep. He's simply paid to take care of them. And so he's happy to do that as long as things are easy and as long as he's getting paid. But if real danger is involved, they abandon the sheep. Which brings us to the wolves in verse 12. The wolves represent the real dangers in life. The wolves are things that make life hard. Things like people letting you down. Things like bad circumstances in your life. Things like pain and sickness, death and need. Things that make your heart sick. Things that take the breath out of your lungs. Things that make you want to quit. When the wolves come, they reveal the hired hands for what they really are. These counterfeit voices and influences in your life do not care about you, and they will abandon you. They claim to be able to take care of you outside of the wall, but when real danger and hardship come, they cannot protect you or satisfy you. Why? Because all these things are counterfeit pursuits of the good life cut off from who you are and what you're designed to do. They cannot satisfy you. They can only satisfy you as long as the circumstances in your life are good, and we all know that life is not always good all the time. In fact, life can be really hard at times. In each of these cases with the robbers, thieves, strangers, and hired hands, you're trying to build a life and future apart from your intended purpose. That leads to loss of joy and possible harm to you and others. Guys, that's a metal hanger in a wall outlet. When I was a kid, my dad built a wooden sign and put it at the end of our driveway out by our mailbox. And it had our last name, James, written really big up at the top. And then hanging underneath it, he added our first names in kind of like smaller signs. And when my parents were first married, it just had the names Dennis and Debbie. Then in 1979, they got to add another name, Jenny, when my sister was born. And then, only 13 months later, they got to add another name, Tammy, when my other sister was born. Then in 1982, my parents got really excited because their firstborn son was born. They got to add another name, Stephen. And then some time went by, 10 years in fact, and the names got old and faded until 1992, 10 years later, when my brother was born. Surprise! And they got to add another name, Joshua. Now, his name looked all new and shiny next to ours. And to me, that sign by our driveway represented who we were as a family and what we were about. So some of you guys have similar signs on the driveway of your life. And that sign represents who you are and what you want life to be about. And so you want the good life. And hanging from your signs is your plan to get it. Things like responsibility. If you want the good life, then you have to be responsible, right? You got to take care of the things that you have to do before you get to the things that you want to do. Things like maintaining or providing or spending your money on boring stuff like term life insurance. Along with that, we all desire security. We want to be safe. We want a steady job. We want a matching 401k. We want a house in a nice neighborhood. Of course, we all crave recognition. We want to be esteemed by our peers. We want to be recognized for our accomplishments. We want to be liked on our Facebook post. In general, we want to make a name for ourselves. Of course, we're all wired for connection as human beings. We want a fulfilling marriage. We want happy and healthy kids that have more opportunities than we had ourselves. We want friends and colleagues that are there to support us through the good and through the bad. Of course, we want life to be filled with activities and leisure. We want to be able to go to the beach or to the mountains on the weekend. We want to be able to save up, to be able to take the family to Disney or the Grand Canyon or to the cruise. And we want to be able to nurture our hobbies and our interests and our dreams. We all want freedom, financial freedom, freedom to do what we want. A government and a society that works for me, a nice nest egg so that we can enjoy retirement. And then we want fulfillment. Fulfillment. We want a life of meaning and purpose. We want to get to the end of our life and say that our life work added something. We want our kids and our grandkids to remember us with pride. Now, some of these signs might have resonated with you more than others, but I imagine several of these signs line up pretty closely with the road that you're on. In fact, if you had all of these things going for you, then life would be pretty good. And then almost as an afterthought, we remember, oh yeah, and Jesus fits in the mix too. And to be honest, I'm not always too intentional about where he fits in, but I'm sure that he does. And I wish that I could say that our family signs stayed the same, but the truth is that time went by, transitions happened, and people moved on. My sister Jenny was the first to leave home. She went off to college and got married and moved to Raleigh, and her name came off the sign. Then Tammy went to Ireland, decided that she liked it so much, she moved there. She met an Irish guy named Joe. They got married. Now they're raising a family over there. Her name came off the sign. I was next. I married Sherry, and her and I quickly moved up to Indiana. My name came off the sign. And it took a lot of time, but eventually Josh got old enough to go to college and then got his master's degree. Then he moved back in with mom and dad, and then eventually moved out, and his name came off the sign, leaving just mom and dad. And then about 2 years ago, after battling cancer for about 20 months, my mom went home to be with the Lord. And now my dad's name is the only name that's left. Time, change, transition, deconstruction, loss. One by one, the names came off the sign. Some of you guys are planning a life and a future for yourself, and Jesus is not central to that plan. And everything on that list might be perfectly legitimate, and that plan may very well bring some meaning, purpose, and satisfaction to your life. But if Jesus isn't central, it is a counterfeit pursuit of the life that is really life. You were made for the Lord. You were designed to gain your sense of who you are from who Jesus is. You were designed to gain your sense of what you do from what Jesus did for the world. And any life that you try to build that cuts the Lord out of the mix or simply tries to fit him in will not and cannot satisfy you. That's trying to live your life against its intended purpose. That's a gold nugget doorstop. You were made for a lot more than that. And the Good Shepherd wants to lead you into a life that's all about him. That's the life that's really life. And this series could be the beginning of a deconstruction for you, where you start taking down some of the signs that you put up, where you start taking apart some of the plans you've made and say, Jesus, what do you have for me? Who do you want me to be? What do you want me to do for you and for your kingdom? Jesus said in verse 10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. The life that's really life. So how do you live this life that the Lord intends for you to live? The answer to that comes from two things that Jesus said in this passage. Jesus said, I am the gate. And Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. So let's talk real briefly about the statement where Jesus says, I am the gate. Verse 9 says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. So we talked about the sheep pen and how it represents a place of protection. We talked about the wall around the pasture. And we talked about the bad guys that climb over the wall and how they represent illegitimate ways of entering the good life or to enter salvation. When Jesus says, I am the gate, he's saying that he is the one and only way to legitimately pass through the wall. He's the only way to enter the pasture. He's the only way to enter real salvation. He's the only way to experience the good life or the life that God intended for us. It's impossible to experience the good life without Jesus. Throughout the book of John, Jesus makes 7 I am statements, and all of them connect Jesus to this idea of life. In John 6:51, Jesus says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. He compared himself to the manna that came down from heaven that the Israelites ate during the Exodus that sustained them along their journey. So Jesus is saying that he is the only one who can provide you the spiritual nutrition that you need to keep you spiritually healthy and spiritually satisfied. In John 8:12, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Meaning Jesus is the only one who can shine light and truth into a dark and deceptive world so that you can find your way to the one true God. In John 10:9, Jesus said, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved, meaning Jesus is the only door that you can pass through to move from the realm of condemnation and death to the realm of forgiveness and life in the Lord. In John 11:25, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. This means that if you believe in Jesus, then death does not have the final word in your life. Jesus does. Death, your biggest enemy, has lost. Eternal life has won. And in John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And in John 15:5, Jesus says, I'm the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. All of these statements come together to say, if you have Jesus, you have life. But if you don't have Jesus, then you don't have life. So why then would any of us try to plan our lives without Jesus as the centerpiece of all of it? And in John 10:11, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. If the pasture is the place where all our needs are met and we are the sheep, then Jesus is the good shepherd that leads us in and out of the pasture. He leads us in and he leads us out. Our role as sheep is to follow the good shepherd. So what does it look like to follow Jesus, the Good Shepherd? Well, first of all, the sheep recognize Jesus' voice, the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus is the Good Shepherd who knows you and calls you by name. Verse 14 says, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. Verse 4 says, Jesus goes ahead of the sheep, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And so my question for you guys is, do you know Jesus' voice well enough to follow it? Are you familiar with the sound of his voice? Have you spent time listening to his voice in Scripture? Are you intimate enough with Jesus to know when a stranger is mimicking his voice in order to lead you down an alternate path? Do you really know Jesus? Because he sure knows you, and he loves you. Eastern shepherds knew every single sheep in their flock. In fact, it was common for them to give a name to each one. And it's the same with Jesus and his flock. Verse 14 is saying that just as well as the members of the Godhead know each other within the Trinity, Jesus knows you fully and loves you perfectly. Do you guys really believe that Jesus is crazy about you? That he obsesses over you? Psalms 139:17 says, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. And so go to the beach sometime. Scoop your hand through the beach and try to fathom the number of grains of sand in just one handful. And then look down for miles down the beach one way, miles down the beach the other way. And just think about how countless the number of grains are. And yet, if you were to count each time that the Lord has thought about you and loved you, that number would fall short. And yet, in his obsession over you, he is not needy. As the God of the universe, he doesn't need anything, yet he wants you. He desires you. If you remember the hired hand, when the wolves come, they risk nothing because they don't care about you. But here's what it says in verse 11. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And so let's talk about the sacrifice that Jesus made for you. A long time ago, before the foundation of the world, Jesus knew us, loved us, and chose us. But from the moment that we were all born, we chose to leave the sheep pen, to go our own way, to do our own thing against the wishes of the good shepherd. We left the protection of the wall and soon found ourselves surrounded by the wolves, an insurmountable enemy, sin, condemnation, and death. But we had a hero, Jesus, the Son of God, the good shepherd who took on the wolves. In an epic face-off, Jesus dealt a mortal blow to the enemy, taking him out for good, but not before taking a hit himself, a hit that cost him his life, death in our place on the cross. Jesus knew that loving us would cost him his life, but he chose to do it anyway. He sacrificed it all. He laid down his life for the sheep, but he didn't stay dead. Verse 18 says, I lay down my life for the sheep only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. And 3 days later, having taken the hit that we deserve, Jesus showed his authority off, and he took his own life back. Having defeated our enemy once and for all, he now leads us in and out of the pasture so that we can live the life that is really life. But you have to truly believe it in order to receive it. You have to believe in Jesus. You have to surrender to him as the good shepherd of your life in order to receive this abundant life that he offers you. Hear me on this. Jesus did not die on the cross just to start another religion. Jesus did not die on the cross to make you a more religious person. Jesus did not die on the cross just to become a part of your life. Jesus died on the cross to become your whole life, to rescue you, to restore you, to return you to your intended purpose, to understand who you are in light of who he is, and to understand what you're supposed to do in light of what he did. That's the good life. That's the life that God intended. That's what it means to live life that's really life. Everything else is just a counterfeit. Following Jesus means recognizing the voice of the Good Shepherd who gave his life for the sheep. It also means following the Good Shepherd in and out of the sheep pen for the sake of the gospel. Verse 9, Jesus says, I am the gate. Whoever enters me through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pastures. This means that the good life is spent both inside and outside of the sheep pen. The life that is really life is being with the Good Shepherd wherever he leads you. That's even true when he leads you outside the wall, outside protection. Because look, the wall isn't your protection, Jesus is. And the pasture isn't what satisfies you, Jesus is. And some of you might be wondering why Jesus would lead you outside the wall. And the answer to that is found in verse 16. Jesus says, I have other sheep that are not of the sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. And in this passage, Jesus is speaking to a Jewish audience. They were in the Lord's flock because of their faith in the God of Abraham. When Jesus said, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen, he's referring to non-Jewish people who would later enter his fold after hearing and believing in him on account of the witness of his followers. In other words, he's talking about you and me, and he's also talking about unbelievers in our lives who are waiting to be saved until we tell them about Jesus. The reason why Jesus leads us in and out of the sheep pen is because he has other sheep that are chosen for his flock, but they aren't in his pasture yet. They're out there, out among the wolves, and he's leading us, the ones who are already part of his flock, to go out there with him and bring them in. I want you guys to understand something right now. There are people in your lives that Jesus has chosen to be a part of his flock. They just don't know it yet. In other words, Jesus knows them, loves them, chose them, and died for them to be in his flock, but they aren't in it yet. They are waiting for someone to take the time to get close with them, tell them about the Good Shepherd, and lead them to Jesus. And here's the point. Because they are already chosen by the Lord, all they need is an invitation, and they will come running. To be clear, I'm talking about people at your job, people who live in the house next to you, the cashier you keep constantly running into at the grocery store, people you sit next to in class, people in your homeschool co-op, people on your ball team, people in your dance studio, people in other countries and states that God may someday lead you as you follow the Good Shepherd. Some of these people in your life are already chosen by the Lord. They're just waiting to hear the voice of Jesus, and they will come running to him. You could be the mouthpiece of Jesus that brings them in. And that requires you to follow the lead of the Good Shepherd as he leads you in and out of the pasture to bring them in. That requires you to trust him for protection, and he's shown himself capable. That requires you to see the people the same way that Jesus sees them, to love people with a relentless love that leads you to make sacrifices in order to reach them. It leads you to make Jesus the center of your life so that everything about you flows from him. And it leads you to surrender your dreams and plans so that you can pick up Jesus' mission of seeking and saving the lost. That's the good life. That's living life according to your intended purpose. That's the life. That's really life. See, there's another one, another verse that says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Only then these other things will be added. You are created for God, to get your sense of self from who he is and your sense of purpose from what he did. It's all about him. It's not about you. Anything that sells you short of that is a counterfeit life. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they have life and have it to the full. Jesus has been pursuing you with a relentless, undying love from before you were born, before the foundation of the world. Some of you guys have spent your entire life unaware of that love, or distracted by the good life that you're trying to build for yourself, or maybe even passively resisting him. And I hope that this morning that you're more aware of the relentless love that Jesus has for you, that led him to sacrifice everything for you. So maybe this series is an invitation for you to stop resisting Jesus' pursuit of you and yield to the abundant life that he's offering you. Some of you guys might even be wondering, in order for me to be a Christian, do I have to give up on all my dreams and aspirations? Well, depending on the circumstances, it might mean some of that. But here's what it definitely means. It means asking yourself a very healthy question that we all need to ask ourselves from time to time. And that question is this: are my dreams being generated by my relationship with Jesus, or are they being generated by something within myself? In other words, is Jesus at the center of my dreams? Do I have these aspirations for my life and for my future because they are directly going to build my relationship with Jesus and set me up to uniquely share my faith with others? Or am I just doing the things that I want to do, and Jesus is going to have to find a way to fit into that? And if Jesus is just going to have to fit in, then that's a good indication that you're living a counterfeit life. It has no ability to satisfy you. But if Jesus is at the center of your life, of your dreams, of your aspirations, and all those things orbit around him, then you're on the way to living the life that is really life. For some of you, that might mean taking down a sign or two from the life that you've already started building for yourself, and to take seriously and pray about, Lord, how can I deconstruct some of that stuff and add it to the life that's centered on you? And so I want to pray as we close out that if there's anyone here, Heavenly Father, if there's anyone here, God, that this resonated with, that they realize that they've been basing their life on something besides you. God, I pray that you would reveal that to them. God, I pray that you would give us all eyes to see, ears to hear, hearts, minds to understand that you are the good shepherd, that a life based on you is the only life that's really life. So if there's anyone here, including myself, including anyone else, who needs to take a sign down from this life and add something that's centered on you, Lord, I pray that you would lead them into that it would be genuine and it would lead to change. I pray these things in the name of Jesus.